When it comes to that number overall, you're seeing inflation waking up a lot worse than expected. And core inflation still, as some analysts are saying, still asleep there. But let's get your view on that number right now and how it's been reflected in the bond market today.
The bond market had a fairly mild reaction to the actual print. The front end of the yield curve, specifically in the FRAs and the swap space, obviously had a slightly bigger reaction given the fact that until recently some people were still forecasting an official forecast for November interest rate cut and or maybe January or March. So we've seen a 10 to 15 basis point sell-off there. I think in terms of the actual print, obviously quite a big upside surprise relative to consensus as well as our own view. We were slightly taken by surprise on the food component specifically, and it seems that the meat lag had quite a big impact. But I don't think that this is necessarily the start of a very aggressive turn in trend. I think that the early forecast for the October print is probably sitting somewhere around the 5.3 to 5.4 level. But I definitely do think that we've seen inflation kind of bottoming depending on what happens to the rand from here on out.
Let's talk about the government bond issuance coming out today, announcing issuance as always for next week. 800 million rand of the 2048, 500 million of the 2041, and 800 million rand of the 2031 being auctioned next week. We saw the auction being well supported this week. Overall, what is the general kind of demand being like for government bonds? What are you seeing when it comes to trends in that space?
Well, the first trend is that every Tuesday until you and I die, we'll probably be receiving National Treasury killing us with kindness in the sense of 2.1 billion bonds roughly coming our way every Tuesday. On the flip side, foreigners continue to support our market, and as I pointed out earlier to someone, you know, while it does feel like they're selling from time to time by foreign participants, almost on a weekly basis we get news from some banks at least that they sign up new customers from the offshore base in terms of people looking at markets. And I think that again the inclusion into WGBI has had some impact, at least in this regard. So some push and some pull factors, and then obviously we all look tomorrow towards the MTBPS to see what it actually means for the yield curve. But I think the key in terms of issuance is that, and also if you look at Jacob Zuma's response to the Economist, the very negative Economist article, is that South Africa will maintain an infrastructure spending pattern for at least the next 15 to 20 years, and it'll rely very heavily on the bond market to continue to issue, and rely even more so on foreigners to continue to support our market.
And you talk about, you know, the global wall of money being vast and endless. When it comes to the issue, the supply side, for now, yeah, that is of course a point. But when it comes to the supply side, the government also wanting to venture into Sharia compliant issuance and Sharia compliant bonds with that Sukuk bond. What are your thoughts on that? And is this going to spur a whole new type of investor for South African assets?
Yeah, I think, you know, I suppose there's two views on this one, and I don't think that my view is controversial per se, but I think that if there's one thing that we've seen globally for governments since the financial crisis is that maybe they have to be slightly more opportunistic in terms of funding as and when opportunities arise. Now, we know that South Africa don't like foreign exposure or foreign debt. And they definitely don't like hedging out these offshore issues. But you know, we are on the very low side of foreign debt holdings, and I do think that when the opportunities arise, we should probably be slightly more opportunistic. Earlier in the year, we had a dollar offshore issue, and the demand for that way outstripped the supply. I think there we had an opportunity to maybe issue at least a good $500 to $1 billion extra. The Sukuk, I think, is a very good idea. I think it's great that the Middle East is showing interest in South Africa. And there is talk that Asia is also showing interest in some other products. And I would encourage National Treasury and the government to continue on this path, maintaining a conservative approach, but definitely to just help allay some of the fears on the local issuance side, at least by diversifying slightly more into the offshore base.